questions as we progress throughout this session today. So I'm going to introduce you to Diana Mateer, our college access advisor and financial aid manager, and Meryl Stewart, our college access assistant. So take it away, Diana. Oh, Meryl, sorry, my apologies.
It's me. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and talk about why the essay is an important part of your application process. First and foremost is this is your only opportunity to talk directly to admissions or scholarship committees. Most likely you're not going to have an in-person interview. So this is your chance. So you think of it as your chance to sort of have an interview. And you're going to start by telling your story. It's your opportunity to assign meaning to different types of events in your life. The event really doesn't have to be some exciting event. It doesn't have to be something really important. What they're going to be looking for is what do you have to say about that? And that's what's going to matter to them. How did the experience change you? And what did you learn from the experience? And how did you grow from the experience? And also how it will continue to influence you as you move forward off to college. The stories shared, this is something to also keep in mind, the stories that you share in an essay are going to be what an admissions officer will use to advocate for that student. Portraying your personality, again, since you don't have that opportunity for an in-person interview, this is where you're going to be doing that. Think about it that the reviewer wants to get to know you and who you are. Your essay reveals something that really important about yourself that your grades and the rest of the application can't. Your personality. Those are just facts on a page. This, by writing an essay, they're going to find out who you are. And finally, it's going to demonstrate critical writing and critical thinking skills. This is a great opportunity for you to show some of the things you've been learning in school. And so this is the first time we'll say this, but we'll probably repeat it throughout. This is why it's very important to have people proofread your essay. And if possible, more than one person. And that's something that we do at College Depot, but you can certainly ask a counselor at school, a teacher. But it's really important to have other people read your essay as you're working on it and before you turn it in. So here are some typical examples of scholarship essay questions. You might also see these as well, these types of questions on a college application as well. You're going to also hear the term prompts. So they're questions or prompts. So they're the same thing when we refer to it as a prompt. Let me just read a couple of them off to you so you get an idea of what you might be seeing. So I'll just start with number 2. So describe how you have demonstrated leadership ability both in and out of school. Number 3, describe your most meaningful achievements and how they relate to your field of study and your future goals. Number 4, why are you a good candidate to receive this award? And number 8, I'll just throw a little bit of a different type of question. How have you been financing your college education? And that last question is probably going to be more specific on maybe a scholarship application. The key thing here is that these are just some examples for you to utilize and help you brainstorm as you are moving forward with the essay process. And try and look at these questions or prompts as the reviewer wanting to get to know you, again, portraying your personality. So sometimes these questions seem sort of dry, but you want to then, as you're looking at them, think about that the reviewer wants to get to know who you are. Preparing yourself. This is incredibly important. And obviously you're here, so that's a first step, and that's fantastic. So I'm happy that you're here and came to this webinar. But preparing yourself and getting used to this type of writing is really important. And there's some things that you can think about as you're doing this. First is begin writing early. Write several essays based on the common essay prompts that we just saw in the previous slide. And this will help you practice so you won't need to start from scratch every time. So you can actually have some example essays or even some outlines. So if you're filling out a lot of scholarship applications and they each require a different essay, having the outlines are going to be really helpful so you don't have to start from scratch. And begin writing early is so important. I know that I'm guilty of it as well, waiting to the last minute for various things. And I'm sure some of you know, if you have a test and the next day waiting to the last minute, and specifically with writing essays, if you have an application due tomorrow, you don't want to be up all night writing this essay, because it's always very apparent to the reviewers if you have not spent time on your essay, if you just cobble together something. So make sure to begin writing early. And again, practicing that writing and having those outlines will really help you as you move forward filling out these applications. Doing your research, this is really important as well. As we saw some of the example questions, you think you can just answer them, but you really want to do research about the college or the scholarship organization that you're applying to. Researching them will actually help you to cater your essay accordingly. And they're going to notice if you don't know anything about the place that you're applying to. So one good place to start is if you go to their website, whether it be a college or an organization offering a scholarship, what is their mission statement? This is going to tell you a lot about what they're looking for. And why are you qualified for this particular scholarship or to attend this college? As you're writing the essay and answering the questions, you want to try and match up and see what your qualifications are to how what they're looking for when you do your research. And also, what's also really important is thinking about how you want to present yourself. You're a very complex person, and you need to decide what you want to highlight about yourself. There can be many different characteristics that you want to highlight, but you need to figure out as you're doing each application what you do want to highlight. So for example, one committee might be really interested in adversities that you've overcome, while another one might be more interested in what your intellectual curiosity is or what your career goals are. So now I actually have a question for the group, and I'm going to have you guys utilize the chat. So this is going to help you see what you're going to be doing as you're brainstorming and writing these essays. So my question to the group is, can you think of one word that describes yourself? So I'm looking for words like reliable or creative or friendly. And this is just a little exercise to show you and gives you an idea of the kinds of things you're going to be doing as you're preparing and writing these essays. So go ahead and use the chat box. I'll give you a moment and we'll see what you guys come up with. Fantastic. I see my first one. I see dynamic. That's fantastic. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Resourceful. Perfect.
And Meryl,
Creative.
this is Chris. I got a couple that were private. One is dynamic, or thoughtful, outgoing, organized, persistent, dependable, and then you can see some of the others.
Yes. Perfect. Honest, that's a great one too. But the idea of this exercise is to think about, again, it's just brainstorming. It's going to help you get better as you write these essays. Of course, you're going to have specific prompts and specific questions that you need to answer, but doing this type of brainstorming is really helpful. And you actually might have, I know sometimes they do have very simple questions where they might ask you, think of a word that describes yourself, and then you would have to write an essay around that particular question. But great work. So you guys did a great job on that exercise. So, okay. So knowing who your readers are is also really important. So as you're writing, we can get caught up in just sort of you're writing, you're answering the question, but you want to also think about who's going to be reading my essay. You want to understand, as I mentioned before, their mission statement is a great place to start to see what they're looking for and what their goals are. Going to the website for the organization, you can go and see biographies and essays of past winners. I highly recommend doing that. It's really worthwhile because you can see what they were looking for in the past when they've given out scholarships, and that'll be really helpful as you're writing your essay, as you're applying. Analyzing the prompt. Again, this is something you're going to want to come back to repeatedly as you're writing, because it's very easy to think you're answering the question. And I've been guilty of this as well in the past, where you think you're writing an essay and you're answering it, and then you read the essay after the fact and you somehow went off on a tangent. That's very easy to do. And you think you did a great job, but and the essay might actually really be a great essay, but you really didn't answer the question. So you really want to be focusing on that and analyzing that. And you want to make sure that you read between the lines. It's actually your job to determine what to emphasize as you're answering the question, and to try and figure out, as you're reading between the lines, what they're looking for. And finally, please ask questions. College admissions offices, as well as scholarship organizations, are very happy to answer any questions you have. If you're not sure if you're eligible for a certain scholarship or if you can apply to a certain college, just give them a call and ask. As long as you're polite about it, they're happy to answer those types of questions. So does anyone have any questions at this point? And feel free to put it in the chat. And if you can't think of anything now, if you remember later, we'll be asking throughout, so we can certainly answer your questions later. So do we have any questions?
Nope, nothing. Doesn't look like we have any so far.
Perfect. Okay. So narrative essay writing is about telling a story. And when I say narrative essay writing, that's what you're going to be doing when you fill out these scholarship and college applications. It's a different type of writing, and it might be something that you're not used to doing. A lot of your school assignments might be something, it's a different style for sure than probably what you've done in school, depending on the types of classes you've taken. You'll be writing about your personal experiences. And again, remember I said this before, the reviewer is reading these essays. They want to get to know who you are. So that's why you're giving a narration of that and of your story. This type of essay writing uses descriptive, exciting, and active words. You want to use vivid details and imagery wherever possible. The main goal is really to engage your reader. They're going to be reading a lot of these essays, so you want to engage them. So try and remember that, you want to be using those descriptive, exciting, and active words. And the key thing with this here, though, is that the story, as I mentioned before, doesn't have to be whatever experience you might be writing about, does not have to be an exciting story. It's really how you're telling the story. So for example, I've actually read an essay about a student who wrote about a family dinners and what those family dinners meant to her. And it was a wonderful essay. It was really descriptive and really engaging, but again, it was a really simple topic, just family dinners. So, don't be worried if you don't have any really exciting experience to talk about. It's how you're writing about the experiences that are important to you and how they shape you. So content is important. So you want to be striving for depth rather than breadth. And what I mean by that is you want to really narrow your focus to one or two major themes rather than trying to cover your entire life. It's very easy to get caught up in that. And again, when you're trying to cover everything, then your essay might be getting really long and maybe not as engaging as if you really try and focus on two major themes. And again, you'll be looking at those prompts and questions and then thinking about the themes that you want to focus on and how they match up. Stay aware of the reader's attention span. because they're going to be reading. The thing to keep in mind, as we were talking about knowing your readers, is they're reading a lot of essays. So you want to keep them engaged and think about their attention span. The essay prompt, whatever the question was, and then the word limit. I don't know if you've ever had to be concerned about word limits in school, but usually if you're using a word application process, you can actually see the word count in the lower left-hand corner. Usually it tells you how many words, but that's something you want to keep in mind, because a lot of times they do have specific instructions about the word limit, and you want to show them that you've paid attention. You don't want it to be way too short, and you don't want it to go way over. You want to show them that you actually read instructions. And then elaborate on the important parts of the essay. Again, it sort of goes back to focusing on the two major themes, and those are the parts you really want to dig into and elaborate on. Don't just state, demonstrate. And what this means is you don't want to just be using words and just talking about an experience. Rather than telling the reader that you value volunteering in the community, illustrate that concept with a story in which you were a volunteer. So it's like really easy to say, I love volunteering. But a better way, and I can use a personal example for myself, even though it was a long time ago, but when I was in high school, I volunteered at a children's hospital, and I was terrified. I have to admit, I was very nervous about doing that. And so what I did is I wrote a little bit about the experience, about how I was fearful in the beginning, and then how that experience changed me when I developed relationships with some of the patients there. So that's like a very specific story. Instead of me just saying, I volunteered at a children's hospital and I liked it, I got more specific about what I was doing at the children's hospital and those relationships that I developed there. Walk the reader through your experience. Use descriptive words. We mentioned that before. You want to use those descriptive, active words to engage them in your story. And really just think about the quality instead of quantity too, is another thing to think about. And I will turn it over to Diana at this point, unless anyone has any questions.
Meryl, I have a question for you.
Okay.
When is the best time to start practicing your essays, and who at College Depot can review our essays?
Well, that is a great question. So you really want to start, because a lot of these scholarships and college applications you're going to be working on in the fall of your senior year. But there's actually, you can start when you're a freshman in high school. You can even start prior to that as well, because the sooner you get comfortable writing these types of essays, the better. So I would recommend, again, as soon as possible, when you're even a freshman or sophomore, you can start working on the essays. And then at College Depot, there's a few of us, Diana, myself, and there might be a few others that actually can do an essay review. All you would have to do is call our phone number off of the website and make an appointment with us, and then we can go over your essay. And I highly recommend, again, how I mentioned, this goes back to what I mentioned before about not waiting till the last minute, is the sooner if you are working on an essay and you have an application due, get it to us as soon as possible, because so then we can go through different drafts with you instead of having to like maybe scramble up something and you have it due the next day. So the sooner you make an appointment for us to review your essay, the better.
Okay, great, Meryl. Thank you. Nicole Kirkland has a question. She says, is it a good idea to mention things like single parent household or info such as like this in your essays?
Actually, we're going to be getting into that a little bit more. Diana will expand on that, but that certainly, if that's part of your experience, that's something, that's something that you can talk about. But we're going to get into in a moment some of the topics that are good to cover and not to cover.
Okay, and final question. Heinrich is asking, is there a specific point of view that the narrative essay needs to be written in?
A specific point of view? I don't think so. Again, what you want to focus on is answering that prompt, making sure you're answering the question, and then letting them know who you are. Those are the things that you want to be focusing on as you're answering the questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Meryl.
Thank you.
right, we're ready to move on. And I wanted to provide an answer to that last question as well regarding point of view. It really can be, because it's a story of you or the story of me, it can really be a first person point of view, or I have seen some very creative essays written in the third person. That's a little harder, but it's really up to you. So hopefully that helps to answer the question, that it's really wide open how you want to approach it. But my best piece of advice today is not to bore your readers. You've had a few minutes to look at this young man sitting by his computer saying or thinking, I only have 1,000 more essays to read before lunch. And that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but that actually is somewhat true. First of all, I want you to look at the young man. He is probably not much older than you, quite a bit younger than me, but he is an admissions officer or a scholarship committee member. And I have had admissions officers tell me they have approximately 12 minutes to look at an application, all of it, including the essay. Or they have 20 minutes to look at each scholarship application. And if you don't really grab that reader and engage that reader from the very beginning, then you have not done yourself any favors, because it is likely that he or I or whoever is reading your essay is going to get bored very quickly and move on to the next one. So you don't want to be boring. You don't want to begin your essay with, I am Diana Matier and I'm a senior at Bioscience High School and I want to be a chemical engineer. You have just wasted approximately 1/3 of your essay. So we're going to show you today some tips and techniques for doing things a little bit more positively and differently. You want to be yourself, first of all. You might not think you're very interesting. And Meryl touched on that. You don't think your life has been very exciting. You don't have very many interesting things to say. But I can guarantee you, you can think of at least one event or one attitude you have that makes you an interesting person. So focus on that. Interest in the ordinary, extraordinary in the ordinary is what you need to achieve. You also want to be positive. Talking incessantly about failure is not a positive approach to an essay unless it resulted in tremendous growth or a learning experience, particularly academic failures. So for instance, if you had a really rough freshman year and then you righted the ship and everything is fine now, you might want to address that freshman year less than stellar performance in an addendum or a note that's part of the application. You will frequently find that there is a section in an application, either for admission or a scholarship, that allows you to address particularly an academic deficiency, rather than devoting an entire essay topic to it if there's something else that you can talk about. So keep in mind that that positivity, that optimism is extraordinarily critical. Now I want to talk for a moment about introductions. The essays that I read, and I read a lot of them at the College Depot, those essays usually have a unique first paragraph or an unusual introductory sentence. And I wanted to share a few extreme examples of this. These come not from the essays at the College Depot, but from our friends at Stanford University. I want to take you through these and how they made me think. What about perhaps the student changes her name each time she places an order at Starbucks? Why might that be? Perhaps she's an aspiring actor and she's trying on different roles, even when she orders her coffee. So that's kind of where my mind went with that one. The second one, maybe the student says, I have old hands, because that student has juvenile arthritis, and that's a childhood form of a disease that normally affects their grandparents. So talking about that and how it has been to deal with something that normally is reserved for geriatric patients might be a very good essay topic if she can describe how she's mastered that illness. Maybe this student has never seen anyone get so excited about mitochondria. I didn't even know what this was until I looked it up. So I obviously am not a science major, but perhaps that student's 9th grade science teacher talks so passionately about this subject that the student has decided to become a cell biologist or a medical doctor. And it all goes back to that freshman science teacher. And finally, when I was in the 8th grade, I couldn't read. Well, I obviously want to know more about that as the reader. I want to know what happened, why the student made it all the way to the 8th grade without being able to read, and how the student overcame that obstacle to get where they are today. So these are some very unusual first sentences that lead into an entire essay topic. So don't be afraid to be a little creative, and we're going to show you some examples of that here in a moment. I want to turn your attention now to something that Meryl mentioned to you, which is the use of your word choice. Using strong, powerful words in general, rather than just average verbs or average words. You are under a word count, so make every word count, but don't use words just as filler space in order to meet a minimum word count or a maximum word count. So let's look at this picture for a moment and the 4 statements about it. And I'm going to ask you to vote for in a moment for numbers 1, 2, 3, or 4, which one you find the most powerful, and then we'll discuss them. First of all, my cat ran across the field and caught a mouse. Or, my cat quickly ran across the field and skillfully caught a mouse. Or, my cat darted across the field and pounced on a mouse. And finally, a mouse was severely captured by my cat, who ran at a very quick rate across the field. So, in order 1, 2, 3, or 4, if I could have a few people enter in chat which one you find the most dynamic.
Putting 4 and 3s, Dana.
I'm seeing a lot of 3s as well. I see a couple 2s and 4s.
3s, 4s, 3 and 4, 3.
Okay. So let's talk about each one of these. Thank you all for participating. I really appreciate that. Let's talk about the first one. Not very many people or any voted for number 1. And that's basically because this is the most basic of sentences and words. Ran and caught. You certainly know what it means to run and what it means to catch something, but is that extraordinarily descriptive? No, it is not. The second sentence, my cat quickly ran and skillfully caught. This is better than the first one, but it is simply using adverbs to describe verbs. So you're adding an extra word to describe ran and describe caught. Can you run unquickly? Some people would say you could, but really, do you need to say quickly ran? And if you caught a mouse, you probably did have some skill. So saying that a cat was skillful at catching a mouse is pretty redundant. Number 4, and you're probably getting to which one I like the best, but number 4 asks you to do much the same thing in describing this activity, but it first of all uses the past tense. Was fiercely captured. You've used 3 words there when perhaps you could use 1. And again, if you're striving to get as much material as you can in the essay, you want to cut words when you can. Who ran at a very quick rate. What does at a very quick rate mean? Quickly. So I really like number 3 the best. I find it to be the most dynamic. And so those of you who were caught between numbers 3 and 4, number 3 is simply a more succinct way of talking about this picture. Darted is far more dynamic than just ran, or pounced is far more dynamic than caught, because you know that a cat can pounce. So that's really showing you that picture, even if you don't see it. So are there any questions about why number 3 is the strongest, in my opinion? And again, it might not be yours. These are my choices, not yours. And that's a very important point. When we review your work at the College Depot, we will give you our assessment of what it means and what could make it stronger or better. But if we lose your voice at any point in time, or we say something that loses the meaning of what you meant to say, I'll always tell you, do what feels best in your gut in the end, because we're also one person reviewing your essay. And we'll talk about the other people here in a moment. Any questions, Meryl or Megan?
No questions.
We're going to look at a real life example. This is an example of a student who's wrote this essay in June of 2020, so just last month. And she wrote it as part of an essay workshop that lasted for several days. So this is the beginning of her really first or second draft of an essay. And rather than read it, I would like you simply to look away from your computer for a moment and let us read it to you so you feel this essay. And so, Meryl, I will begin with you if you can read the first 3 paragraphs.
Sure. I was the straw that broke the camel's back. I had never been to San Diego, so when my cousin offered to take me, I jumped at the chance. It was a long 5-hour drive in a cramped car, but at the time I believed it was worth it. I had never been to the beach, never stuck my toes into the warm, dry sand, or felt the wind beneath my metaphorical sails. But as I stepped out of that car for the first time in 5 hours, I was able to not only feel and hear the breeze brush against me, but taste the salty sea air as it caressed my face. I was able to reach down and feel every grain of sand beneath me, tickling my senses. In that moment, the world felt as though it were mine, an oyster waiting to be claimed. If only this serenity had lasted. My then aunt was an interesting person, borderline psychotic, if I'm being honest, but I never thought much of it before I experienced it firsthand. My only salvation was my cousin, a blinding light I couldn't help but follow in the darkness that was her mother. With my cousin by my side, I was mostly able to forget her and enjoy the trip. It wasn't until the end, when we were enjoying SeaWorld, that she struck.
Thank you, Meryl. You will notice that I have highlighted a few sentences or words here, and I wanted to talk about them. First of all, I wanted to talk overall about the sensory experience that is in the second paragraph of this essay. You might think, wow, that's a lot of description, and that's silly, but it isn't, because it paints a picture. I always tell students, I want to feel like I'm in the room with you, or I want to feel like I'm sharing the experience beside you. I certainly shared this one with this student, but I want to go first to the first line. I was the straw that broke the camel's back. We've probably all heard that in some context. It is what's called a cliche. And you might want to be careful about cliches and quotations to begin essays. But when I say be careful, don't hesitate to use them if they make sense in the larger context of the essay. I love this first line because I want to know how she was the straw that broke the camel's back. And you certainly cannot feel that from the next 2 paragraphs, but we're about to see in a moment. So she starts with something that kind of makes me wonder where she's going with this. So I'm going to keep reading because I want to know more. Notice that in this wonderful second paragraph describing her experience on the beach, she's describing something very fun, calm, serene. I'm feeling the vibe here. But then she takes a pretty dark turn at the end of the second paragraph. If only this serenity had lasted. Now I'm really interested. What happened here? And then she begins to describe a couple of words, then aunt. That tells me if it was her then aunt, maybe that person is no longer her aunt. So I'm kind of even more curious now. And she starts to describe her in a not very pleasant way. I'm getting a real idea that this is a powerfully negative woman, borderline psychotic. And notice that she capitalizes pronouns here, which is why I have capitalized, or I've highlighted her and she. You might think initially that this was a typo and she shouldn't be doing that. She did it for absolute effect because she wanted to lend power to this woman, even using the pronouns of she and her. So excellent job of using a tool that normally is not reserved. Yeah, pronouns are not generally capitalized, but she does it very effectively here. I want to know, how did she strike? So we will go on to the next few paragraphs of this essay, and I will ask Megan if she would be able to read those for us. Again, concentrate on listening rather than reading.
Definitely. Thank you, Diana. My uncle is clearly a very tolerant and generous person. We were in the gift shop when he realized my mom forgot to give me money for souvenirs, so he announced that we could get anything below $20. Once he said that, I beelined past the snow globes and stuffed orcas and straight towards a violently pink stuffed dolphin. It was like my world was complete. Then I grasped its feather soft skin and held it to my chest until it was snatched from my hands. I whipped around and saw the devil herself holding it above me. And then the terror set in. It was at that moment, as she burned her evil gaze into my memory, I realized that I was terribly afraid of her. Her frozen-like statue crackling under her pressure. And all I could do, nothing, as she shouted, "Who said you could take this? Are you stealing it? It's your mother's fault for not giving you the money. This means that you don't get anything." That was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Okay. Notice that this student is doing something very interesting here. It's the gift shop at SeaWorld. How fascinating is that? Yet I can see her walking around trying to choose a souvenir for herself because, sorry for my coworker here, she was trying to choose a souvenir for herself because her uncle was being kind. You can pick something out. She picked something she absolutely loved. I frankly don't know what violently pink means. Philip, I'm so sorry. We're babysitting a dog and he's decided to participate today. But notice that she describes this thing in her hand very, very vividly. I want to call your attention to the fact that she has an incomplete sentence in this paragraph. Until it was snatched from my hands is not a complete sentence. Now, did she do that because she doesn't know how to write? I can guarantee you that she did it for effect. And if you are doing something like that for effect, feel free to use it, because I can tell from the rest of this essay that this student knows how to write a complete sentence. So be sure that if you feel you want to write something just for a pow, you know, the bam effect of it, that's what she's doing here, and it's perfectly okay. And then finally, I like her use of a quotation. I can hear this evil woman accusing her of stealing this thing. And I know a little bit of the backstory here, and this is a pretty evil woman, and I can hear her venom as she asks this poor girl to define why she has that in her hand and why she thinks she deserves it. So before we go on, does anyone have any reactions to this, either positive or negative, about what you've read so far? And you may be just digesting it right now, but feel free to, if you have any initial reactions, share them right now.
Yeah. Okay, Diane. Jane thinks that she really likes her writing. It's captivating.
Right. It really is. This is a little thing, right? I drove in a car to San Diego. How many of us have done that? I went to the beach, but then, and let's see, any other comments?
Julie says, I like how she's very detailed.
Yes, extraordinarily important. You can say in 5 sentences, I got in a car and drove for 5 hours and went to the beach, and then we went to SeaWorld, and my aunt's not a very nice person. I could care less. But this, I really was interested. So thank you all for your comments. Now let's talk about the rest of this essay. The student did not have the opportunity to finish the essay at the time we spent together completely, but she and I talked about the ending. I can tell you how this story ends. This essay ends with the writer's uncle divorcing her aunt and pointing to this particular incident or experience as the straw that broke the camel's back. So the writer explained to me how she felt somewhat responsible at first. That's why she said, I was the straw that broke the camel's back. But later, when she reflected on the experience, she changed her mind. She knew she wasn't the only reason that her uncle and aunt got a divorce. But the writer took that incident to heart, the experience at SeaWorld, and she now has decided that it's up to her as a person.
Maybe you want to listen to the next one.
I'm getting some feedback here. Okay. The writer took the incident to heart, and she now believes that she has to always be careful with her words and her actions so that they don't hurt others, like she was hurt by her aunt. And then finally, this is really a very simple lesson, but she's going to have to tie it up with a nice bow at the end and show how she's learned. And in the process, she has used an extremely vivid recollection of the event and a description of it. So this is where she and I were working on finishing the story. So you can really finish it for yourself. Once you've said all that nice stuff, how do you tie it up and show in the learning experience from it? Any questions about how the students should approach an ending here? By the way, the ending is the hardest part. You're just going to have the tendency to want to trail off there somewhere, but you have to tie the end to the beginning. All right, in the interest of time, let's keep moving. You always want to present your best self. That means you want to try to stay away from controversy as much as you can. We had a question earlier about talking about growing up in a single parent household. That can be one of the most common events in a student's life, but it also can be one of the most important. But if you're approaching particularly controversies like religion or politics, or why your dad was wrong and your mom was right in a divorce situation or a single parent situation, you may want to stay away from those because you may hit a nerve with your reader, particularly in religion and politics. We as readers try to say, we don't care about these things, we're going to be objective, but let's face it, we all have thoughts in our subconscious minds that may make us make a judgment that you might not want us to make. So try to stay away from those unless the prompt specifically says, please address this religious or political topic. And give yourself some time to review it. I have taken a lot of controversial topics and I've actually suggested to students ways that they could make them less controversial, but equally as powerful. So allow someone to edit or review your work, both for content and for grammar. It could be your teacher, it could be a counselor, it could be your parent or your sibling, although sometimes they won't be the most honest with you. And as Meryl and I have mentioned, we're happy to do. In case you need to make an appointment with me, you can send me an email with your work and I will correspond with you by email, and we can set up an appointment to talk about it afterwards if you feel so inclined. So keep that in mind. But do have another set of eyes look at your work, and really do not believe that most of us can write a first and final draft at the same time, unless you are an author of a book or a blog or something like that. Most of us, not even me, and I think I'm a pretty good writer, can write a great first draft that is a final draft as well. So be absolutely sure that you're looking at this and having a second set of eyes on it. Can you have too many people look at it? I believe you can. I've had to tell students, quit showing this to everybody in your neighborhood, because everybody's going to think something differently, and ultimately it has to be an essay that you are satisfied with. Did I have a question, Megan, that I saw someone writing?
This is Chris, and it's a, I'll read the question, but I think you're about to get to it. One of the common prompts, one of the common app prompts is to talk about a belief you questioned. So would it not be smart to talk about a belief you did not agree with in your religion or faith?
Oh, I am about to cover that. So let's move on, Chris. Extraordinarily good question, by the way. That is an example of when a prompt is asking you directly to address a belief or a value. It's hard to answer that prompt without getting into something, right? But you want to be sure that you're not too radical, that you're discussing it calmly, logically. You may be passionate about it, but you want to also be sure that you're seeing both sides of the argument. Controversy is difficult, but the common application in particular will ask you to delve into that, because it is interested in your higher level of thinking and belief systems in some cases, because a lot of private colleges are very concerned with what your values are and what your belief system may be. So you don't have to completely stay away from controversy, but be careful. Notice divorce. Single parent households tend to be very popular essay topics, particularly in cases of separation or divorce when they were once two-parent households. If you have a particular take on that, or some way in which your family has grown from the experience, you can talk about it. But you want to be sure that your entire essay is just not a woe is me, my parents are divorced, because that's a very common issue for students right now, unfortunately. There are a lot of single parent families. So you want to differentiate what makes yours special. Sports are another area that are difficult to talk about, only because sports are either I scored the winning goal and we felt great. But what if the sporting event or the sports team you were on led to leadership skills, or you found out that you weren't the team star, but it still gave you a valuable experience? There are ways to deal with that too. Just be cautious. Obviously, illegal activities are tough to talk about, as are any tragedies, because you don't want your reader to feel sorry for you. You want your reader to find you interesting and insightful. So be sure you are that. Pets are hard to talk about because it's just hard to talk about Fluffy, or the barker in my household. It's hard to talk about that and get any real meaning from it, and just basic happiness and sadness. And finally, mission trips. A lot of students have taken mission trips for their church. And if you've done that and you can treat that mission trip as a cultural experience more so than a religious experience, feel free to talk about it. I don't want you to specifically avoid any of these things. Remember, we just talked about a girl discussing her psychologically impaired aunt. But if you do it in a way in which you are not just inspiring pity from your readers. And finally, I want to call your attention to a scholarship you can all work on right now. It is due at the end of August. It is a local scholarship by the local Pinnacle Auto Glass Company. So because they are a local organization, a local business, they want you to address, why do you believe local businesses are important? Because they think they're important. That's why they're giving you a scholarship. This is a really easy scholarship to apply for. It requires very little in the application, but it does require an essay of up to 1,000 words. Does that mean you have to write 999 or they're going to throw you out? No. It means that you need to get as close to 1,000 meaningful words as you can. So don't write 300 and call it a day. And don't write 1,500 and think I just had so much to say I had to tell them. Stay within the word count and look at some of the approaches that I bulleted for you here. If you have a local business that you respect a lot or you frequent a lot, is it because they know your name, they know your order, they love to give you great customer service? Have they helped your school sports teams, like a robotics team, by donating money or food? Have they shown you that they care about your community? And if there isn't anything like that in your neighborhood, how would you create one? Would you be interested? This is particularly good for business majors. If you think this is the idea I would have, pick anything but an auto glass company because Pinnacle Auto Glass already has that one covered. I love this particular scholarship application too, because they will show you the winners from both 2019 and 2018. They will show you the winning essays, so you have an idea of what they're looking for. And I'm particularly attached to this essay because the 2018 winner was one of my students, and I reviewed her essay at least twice before she turned it in. And so when she actually won the $1,000, I could not have been more pleased for her. She had a great essay to begin with. All we did was refine it a little bit. So please know that this is one you can practice on. And if you feel like turning it in completely, it is a local scholarship. It will give you a lot of chance to qualify, whereas some national or worldwide scholarships are very, very competitive. So you will notice the URL for the scholarship is right at the bottom, but if you don't remember that or get the recording here, just Google Pinnacle Auto Glass Scholarship and it will take you right to the site. All right. I want to open this up for questions for all of you, but we only have a few moments before we start our next session, and you will be with me for part of that one also. But do you have questions for Meryl or me or anything remaining that you'd like to know about how to send us your essays or schedule an appointment to talk more about them?
Hey, Diana, just one question from Angel asking, how much was the Pinnacle Scholarship worth?
Oh, $1,000. And that kind of leads me to a discussion. Like, you might think a 1,000-word essay for $1,000 is not worth doing, but there are parts of that essay, even if you don't get this one, that you could use for another scholarship. And $1,000, for writing a 1,000-word essay is quite a pretty good hourly rate. Any other questions? Chris, Megan?
Nope, that was it right there. That was the only one. So it looks like we are wrapping up just in time.
Excellent. You've all been wonderful, Meryl, and I thank you for your attendance and participation today. Chris, final comments? Megan?
No. Yeah, sorry. One last final question. I'm just trying to get our closing slideshow up. And just to, so everybody knows, the Scholarships and Financial Aid Essentials presentation is going to begin here in a couple minutes. So feel free, if you are participating in the Essay Essentials workshop that we're just now wrapping up, you can go ahead and hang out and learn how to put those essay writing skills to some scholarships. And Diana and Bianca, who just now joined, they're going to go into some of the nitty-gritty between scholarships and financial aid. If you are joining now a few minutes early for the financial aid and Scholarships Essentials. We're going to get that started here in a minute. So give me one quick second. Just wanted to, again, thank you, everybody. It looks like everything went pretty smoothly. And so thank you so much for your participation and for sharing with us throughout the entire workshop. Really, really do appreciate and love all of the comments and questions, contributions. It was really cool to make this as interactive as possible from a distance. So we are College People. We're a free college access center. You can request an appointment to meet one-on-one. Like it was mentioned several times, you can meet one-on-one with an advisor. It can help you with your essays, help you with scholarships, help you with scholarship applications, financial aid, pretty much anything that has to do, anything that you need for college planning, admissions, and scholarships and financial aid. One other thing, so just a reminder, we have, of course, some additional summer sessions coming up. So scholarships and financial aid right now. And then we have two sessions in Spanish for parents, Becas y Ayuda Financiera and Caminemos a la Escuela, Essay Essentials again. So these next two sessions, we're going to have them again on Saturday. So you can register at tiny.cc/CD events. Finally, thank you so much for participating. I'm